Complete guide to CSS Grid starting now. We're going to start by setting up our HTML structure. So we're going to create a div with a class of grid container. Inside of our grid container div, we're going to create 3 more divs, and each one of these is going to have a class of grid item and item followed by its respective number. And for each item, we're also going to include text for its item number. Item 2, and then we're also going to have an item 3. Now we have our HTML structure set up and ready to go. We're going to navigate to our style sheet, and before we turn this into a grid, I want you guys to look at this grid container element right here. You're going to see that it's showing up as a row, and it's not giving us any dotted lines because it's not a grid yet. But if we go ahead and target our grid container class and change the display of this into a grid, you're going to notice that if we look at this, our dotted lines show up, notifying us that it is a grid, and you can also see that our display is set to grid. So you guys can picture what's going on. We're going to change the background color of our grid container to gray, and then what I want to do is target our grid item. So I'm going to target the grid item class here. I'm going to change the background color to the aqua color, and you're going to see that you can't really tell what's going on here. So we're going to go back to our grid container class, change our padding to 1 rem. Now you guys can see that our grid is here with a padding of 1 rem. And then we're also going to specify our gap property, which is going to be the shorthand for our row gap and column gap. And if you only put one property here, it's going to specify 1 rem of gap for both our row and column. So now you guys can see our grid a lot more obvious along with each grid item inside. So now what we need to do is change the layout of our grid. So we're going to do that with grid template columns, and we're only going to specify 1 column at 100 pixels like so. But if we want to have more than one, we can specify that by creating another 100 pixels here, and you're going to see that we have 2 columns now. And if we want 3, we can change that to 100 pixels, 100 pixels, followed by 100 pixels. So that's going to specify the width of each grid item container. So to change this to a relative unit, what we're going to do is change this to 1FR like so, and that's going to be a fractional unit that is relative to the size of our grid. And since it's all set to 1FR, each one of our grid items is exactly the same width. But if we change, let's say item 2 to 2FR, you're going to notice that our second item is twice as large as our first and third item, again because these are relative units. And instead of repeating ourselves a million times, what we can do is use the repeat here. And what this is going to do is it's going to specify the number of columns right here. So now we're going to have 3 columns, and it's also going to let you specify the size of each column. So here we're creating 3 columns and making them 1FR each. And now what I want to do is go ahead and target item 1, and I'm going to make item 1 have a height of 10 rem, as you guys can see here, but that's going to change the height of each one of our grid items, which we do not want. And the reason it's doing this is because we didn't specify what size we want item 2 and 3 to be. So if we go back to our grid item and change our height to 1 rem, you're going to see now, since we specified a size for all of our items, item 2 and 3 is set up at a height of 1 rem, while item 1, since we're specifying it here, has a height of 10 rem. And now we haven't specified a width property either, so each one of our grid items is going to take up a width of 100% of its container. So to change that, what we want to do is specify our width property, and we're going to change this to 50%. And now you guys are going to notice that each one of our grid items is only taking up 50% of its container. Now, if we want to center all these items along the y-axis, what we're going to do is use justify items and change that to the center. And now you guys can see those are all centered in the middle of their containers. But if we also want to center it along the x-axis, what we want to do is use align items, and then we're going to change that to the center. And you guys can also specify for both of these properties start, which is going to be the default for both, and end as well. But for now, we're going to change this back to center, and then you can also justify each item by itself. So if item 1, we want to justify self to the start here, you're going to see that now it's all the way to the left. And you can also do the same thing with align self as well. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get rid of this because that just makes it confusing for everybody. So if we take a look at our grid, it's 3 columns and 1 row. So that's going to take us into our advanced topic, which is going to be grid row. And this is going to let us position our items based on the grid row lines. So the first property here is going to be where you want it to start at. So 1 is going to say start this item at grid row line number 1, and the second is going to be where it's going to end. So this is going to start at 1 and end at 3. Now, if we take a look at our grid, you're going to notice that it created another row in order to fit our item from grid row line 1 to grid row line 3. And the way you guys can count this is starting all the way at the top, which is 1, and then here is going to be 2 because this only counts as 1 here, and then going all the way to the bottom, which is 3. So if we change this back to 2, it's going to be exactly what it was before we made any change, but it's starting at grid row line 1 and going to grid row line 2. And you can also use the grid column property to do this same thing as well. If we change these to 1 and 2 here, it's going to be the same thing as grid row line, but now it's going to be starting at the column lines. And this is going to be 1 and this is going to be 2. If we change this to 3, it's going to go from 1 all the way to 3, which in turn is going to force our item 3 down to a new row here. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that for now. And now I'm going to show you guys how you can use grid to set up a layout for your entire website, which is super useful. So we're going to go back to our HTML and we're going to change our class for our first div here to a class called header. Then we're going to change item 1 here to header. Then our next one, we want it to be sidebar. Then we're going to change the text also to sidebar. Then for our bottom one here, we're going to change this to our content. Then change our text also to content. Now if we go back here, what I'm going to do is get rid of all of this. Then I'm going to also get rid of this, leave our grid template columns at 3 by 1 FR. And then I want to leave our gap, get rid of our padding, and leave this as a display grid. So these are the 4 things that we're going to keep for our grid container. And now we need to specify our grid template areas. To do this, we're going to put each one inside of quotation marks. So since we have this set up as a layout of 3 columns here, we need to specify each one of these as such. So we're going to use our header in each one of our 3 columns in the first row. So we're going to specify it like so. And then to integrate our sidebar and our content, we only want to use our sidebar in the first column of the second row. And then we want to specify our content in the next 2 columns of our second row, like so. And now what we need to do is target our header class, and we need to actually tie these together using our grid area. And we're going to tie this to our header, which is going to take up the entirety of our first row and 3 columns here. And then we're going to change our background color to something more obvious so you guys can see what's going on. We're going to change this to aqua. And then we want to also target our sidebar class, change again our grid area, and make this our sidebar that we specified here. And then we're again going to change our background color to make this more obvious for you guys. And we're just going to make this red for now. And then we're going to do this exact same thing again. So we're going to copy this code, go down here and specify our content this time. And then over here, we're running into an issue because we accidentally capitalized our content class here. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that and fix it and go back to our CSS, change this back to bisque. And now you guys will see that in our second row and first column, our sidebar is displaying. And in the second 2 columns of our second row, our content will be displaying. So you can use this to set up an entire layout for a web page and make it completely responsive like that. So to give you guys a better picture of this, we're going to change the height of this to 20 rem. So now you guys can see our layout of our website. So as we add content to each one of these sections, it will expand the size of these divs. So basically right now we don't have any content, so we're just changing the height manually, but this is really useful to create a nice, clean, and responsive layout that makes developing a website a lot easier. If you guys need help, let me know down below in the comments or go to our website at kelmanwebdesign.com and we would love to help you out. Thanks so much for watching.